go. It's time to go. It is Friday. We are here in the Nutmeg Tavern. Yes, I'm joined. I got Lauren in front of the camera on this side of the time vortex instead of the other side, so you get to hear the disembodied voice embodied.
That's right, here I am.
We have this very fascinating book that we're going to be talking about today. It is very 18th century, and there are so many parts in it that kind of give us the sense of sort of ancient traditions going through the 18th century and how that relates to modern day business. And this book is just fascinating. I don't know how thick the original was, but show them how thick your version is here.
It's not double-sided, but
it's a heavy-duty book for the time period, and it is the ship captain's book for dummies, right? So if you're a ship captain, and there's a lot more to ship captaining than you think there is, and you need like a book. Say you only had one book in your library. What are you gonna find? Where's this book that is going to help you be a ship captain? And interestingly enough, very little of the book, none of the book has to do with navigation. None of it has to do with rigging or sails or sailing a ship at all. This is all about the real job of the ship captain. So a lot of times we think of a ship captain and he's out there, you do this, you do that, blah, 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 you know, that's the real job and we need to steer this way, etc. That's actually the job of the first mate, or in the naval sense, the first lieutenant, or possibly in the Navy, there's this bifurcation between the sailors and the soldiers part, or the officers. Actually, there's three of them. It gets more complicated when you're in the military Navy part. But the master of the ship in the Navy was the guy who was actually in charge of making the ship kind of go where it's supposed to go. The captain, and even in the captain in this sense, is more of the CEO of the ship. And so, yeah, he might have to come out on deck and really kind of, rule the roost, especially if he has an incompetent first mate. But the reality is his job is what we're going to be talking about here today. He's the CEO, he's the banker, he's the lawyer, he's the accountant.
Yes.
What else is he doing?
It just keeps going on. You're like,
right.
He's got to be in charge of the logistics and probably just making sure that everybody has the person to go to when something goes wrong, and they're like, they need to check in with someone, and you're like, because they're going to be too far away to, they can't check in with the owners, they can't check in with anyone. Someone has to be the final authority, and it's going to be the captain. Right,
and so when you're at sea, he is the rule. He is like the head of, if there's any legal issue, or if there's any disciplinary issue, whatever, he's in charge of that. And once he gets to a foreign port, he's acting as the businessman who's actually acting for the people who own the ship, who own the products on the ship, who, all of these kind of circumstances. And there are a lot of weird things that can go wrong. So this book deals with all that stuff. The captain is the one-man financial institution. He's keeping accounts for the entire ship, and he's keeping multiple sets of double entry books. So money coming in, money coming out. He keeps separate books for the ship itself, for the business transactions that are going on, so the cargo. He's keeping track of all the wages, all the things that are being used. So it's like, usually like in the Navy, there's the purser. He's dealing with a lot of the issuing out of goods and food and keeping track of that. But in this case, the captain is doing all of that stuff. Because this is a much smaller, like, in a Navy, you might have 300 men on board ship. A regular kind of commercial ship like this is talking about a dozen or maybe 30 if it's a pretty big ship. So this captain, though, is dealing with a lot of interesting stuff. He has to execute legal contracts when he gets to where he's going. He's got to run all these wages. He has to do bills of exchange. So he might be in places where he has to write like a legalese check that makes it so he can, transact business or buy things for the ship. And I was like, how does that even work? So this book is full of all those kinds of, well, here's an example, and he does have an example of all the books that it takes of a whole voyage.
Yes.
So he has like this sample voyage that they go through. It's like, well, you're gonna buy and sell this. You're doing wages. You're doing all this good stuff. So, like this one thing says, it's like he's a traveling hedge fund man. I can't even say it. Hedge fund manager, and he's taking care of all these things. Can you imagine doing that and running the ship at the same time?
Yeah, and one of the things I really liked about this particular book was a lot of times in the 18th century books, they will be talking at great length and going into detail about something, but they often don't go back and talk about, like, they don't give you a description of it. They're like, you already know what we're talking about. Right. So they will talk in great depth about the details, but they won't give you a big picture. And then sometimes they're giving big pictures and then they don't give detail because that's not what's going on. But this is nicely set up because he will give you, in the intro of each section, he kind of gives you the basic sense of what's going on. And then he goes into more detail. And then he very often will give a direct example of he writes out like the legal document. They're not particularly long, but it's so nice to have all of the stages of explanation in there because I did need every single one of them.
Right. So it has a big section, like different chapters, and sometimes the chapter will be pretty small or a chapter will be huge. There's a big chapter on insurance, and I mean, okay, today you're driving a car. In most states, you have to have insurance. And that's happening all the time in these, in a naval situation, a merchant marine, or a merchant situation, not merchant marine, merchant situation, where every cargo has some kind of insurance on it. You're gonna take something someplace and try to sell it without insurance because anything can happen. And they even talk about things happening. It's like you might have pirates or privateers. You might have somebody happening to your ship and the cargo getting wet. Mm-hmm. You might have a storm. Your ship might sink. Your people might steal stuff. I mean, you just have all of these individual insurance things. So one of the things is he has a full insurance kind of policy written out there. It's not very big. But interestingly enough, it starts off with, in the name of God, right? And at the bottom is another, like, God forbid, anything bad happens. They are, fully aware that they don't have any control of that. And so it's like, we're gonna ask for God's help right here in this insurance policy because we need it. Because bad things are always happening. Ships completely disappear. Like they will, off you go, and they will never make it to the other side. And in some certain circumstances, nobody ever knows what happened. It's like, well, it's like, and I've read in other accounts where they talk about like rats eating through the side of the ship and nobody knowing. And it's like, well, the ship could just sink without people knowing what's going on. So the insurance policy, not huge, but kind of in depth. It does cover all the different situations. And the book really goes into all the bad things that could happen and how to deal with them. So one of the sections where they're talking about a ship wrecking. the wreck of a ship. And the rules about what happens with the shipwreck itself. So, okay, let's say a ship wrecks, like the one we've got here on the screen. And the stuff piles up on the shore. And like the ship breaks up, which happens so often. Really, most of the bad things that happen to ships happen close to shore. Ships rarely just sink out in the ocean. Some, they do. But usually they get driven onto rocks, and then the ship breaks up and the cargo kind of floats ashore. What happens with the stuff? How do we recover it? And there's a circumstance where, and the laws we're talking about here are Great Britain. I'm sure a lot of the, this is what, from 1787? What's the date on that? It's 88, I think. So the laws are going to be similar in America, maybe not, a lot of them are basically based on Great Britain. They're like, we're not going to reinvent the wheel, we're just going to use those and kind of rework them for ourselves. So in the case of a shipwreck, if nothing is alive on board, and the wording here is great, if neither man, cat, nor dog escapes alive, then the contents are, the crown gets it, right? But if even a cat survives, then the rules are all different. Oh, no, wait a minute. The goods are still owned by the owners. It doesn't just kind of go to the state. Now, the goods aren't to the owners completely, because you have people that recover them, and they get a certain amount of, when they sell the goods, they get to keep part of that money, and the owners get part of that money. Yeah. So that's salvage. And they have a whole set of rules about salvage. I don't know, do you remember what was going on with some of the salvage?
Before we do that, you want to hear so this is the insurance
yes.
policies part,
right.
And they're like, okay. So, touching the adventures and perils which we, the assurers, are contented to bear and do take upon us in this voyage, they are of the seas, men of war, fire, enemies, pirates, rovers, thieves, denizens, so that's things that have been thrown out of the boat and are floating on the waves, letters of mart and countermart, surprisals, taking at sea, arrest, restraints and detainments of all kings, princes, and people of what nation, condition, or quality forever. Barratry of the masters and mariners, and of all other perils, losses, and misfortunes that have or shall come to the hurt, detriment, or damage of the said goods and merchandise, or any part thereof. So that's a long list. There's a lot that could happen.
Yeah, and they do kind of have to have some of those open-ended phrases. Any other thing that might happen, X, Y, Z, right? So, so I don't. Let me see if I can find some of the part on insurance or
salvage.
Yeah, salvage. Well, let's see. Where was that? There's bottomry. There we go. I'll have to go back to bottomry. That was a really interesting part. So one of the things that happens with salvage, okay, our ship is kind of, hits some rocks. Everybody but the cat leaves, but the cat stays. Everything's all right, and it's the the magistrates, the constables, other people who are in charge of areas along the coast, and of course this is France or Ireland, Great Britain. It probably does. Obviously, this rule doesn't apply to where it can't apply. But if a wreck is happening, they have the obligation to gather people to rescue the ship and to salvage the goods, to help with the salvaging of the goods. So that's one of the things that they are required to do. Just like you're along the sea, you have to help out ships in distress. and they have this boundary mark, right? So the low water mark. It's like so whose jurisdiction is a particular piece of ground? Well, it depends on where the water. It's like high tide, low tide. The Admiralty is in charge of, has jurisdiction below the low water mark, and common law has jurisdiction above the watermark, the low water mark. And so it's one of those, it's like, and we still deal with that, right? So if you go walking on the beach along the shore in the United States, you'll see these signs that say, private beach. Well, yeah, that's private, but that's above the high water mark or a particular watermark, right? And then below that, well, sorry, this is still public. I can walk along the beach. If my feet are wet, it's all right. I'm not on your private property. Same deal happening here. There's a line. It's like, no, property starts here, and this is the ocean. Just different rules apply here.
So while we're on salvage,
yeah.
So while I'm reading along, this catches my eye because I, of course, recognize it. So they're talking about when they're salvaging and their descriptions of the goods. So here's the flotsam goods, are those floating upon the sea after a ship perishes. And then the jetsam goods are those thrown overboard in time of danger to lighten the ship. And then the lagan goods are those heavy enough to sink when thrown overboard, but which have a buoy attached to them so that they may be found again. And then the stranded goods are those belonging to a ship that springs a leak or is otherwise damaged by running upon a rock, whereby it perishes or so disables as to be incapable of going to sea again, or perhaps breaks to pieces, and the goods are seen to float out of her or remain in the hold and are taken out of that part of her that is dry at low water or when the sea leaves her.
So that's different from flotsam.
Right? It is. And so I love how they're like, we're not leaving it up to chance.
No.
Someone argued about, you can tell, because they're making the rule, someone argued about this one time. So they're like, we are going to be very specific.
Right. So the captain has to know all these rules so that when anything happens, he's like, well, I want to make sure I'm going to throw the guns overboard, but I'm going to buoy them.
Of course.
And then all of a sudden it's like, none of the rules are different now. If I buoy them, then I've got a different right to them than if I didn't buoy them. And if I throw the goods overboard, maybe I don't have any claim on them at all. If they're jetsam, pooh, it's like, well, sorry, bud, out of your hands, right? But if they're in that last case, they're in the ship, they might float away. The rules are a little different. And I was thinking about yes, there's flotsam, jetsam, lagan, and stranded goods. Apparently still used in maritime law today, right? All these things, they may apply differently, but they're all still, it happens all the time.
Right, and while the rules may have changed about how you deal with it, they do still have rules about it that are this specific.
Right.
And you're like, okay, when this sort, and I'm sure it varies by region to region.
Sure.
But it does also seem like there's the maritime law that.
Right. So maybe, if you live on a beach somewhere and this container that fell off a container ship kind of floats up and lands on your, I don't know what the rules are, but you probably ought to look it up because, you sell all those Beanie Babies that are in there and then all of a sudden somebody wants, the money back. So be careful. It's got, of course, if you're Beanie Baby, maybe they got all wet and they sprouted.
They got a little moldy.
It was like, just let them rot. One of the things that happens here that they describe, it's not a huge chapter, but it's called bottomry. And it's apparently very, very old, an old set of laws that a lot of what's happening here is that it's like this problem has happened since people were on the ocean right? So, you know, we're going to lay down the rules, but it's always been a problem. And one of the problems is that you've got a ship. The ships of the time period broke all the time. They were in a continual state of decaying. And when you're in a wooden ship and you're going, 10,000 miles or something, you're going to end up with problems. And ships needed refitted constantly. So you got to do a lot of work on your ship. And what happens when you say you're shipping from Boston and you're taking it to Lisbon, and you get to Lisbon and there is no way your ship is going back home again.
You know that. You're like,
right.
If we do take this out to sea again, we're sinking.
Right.
No two ways about it.
Or even better, you're not going to Lisbon, but you need to take the goods to Italy. And you're in Lisbon and your ship is broken. You don't have enough money to pay for the repairs. And so you undergo a contract called bottomry, where you use the ship itself as the collateral for borrowing money so you can fix it and continue on your journey. And the problem is, of course, the captain, most of the time, a lot of times, the captain's going to own a part of the ship. And they did that on purpose. They wanted the captain to own part of the ship so that he had a material gain by doing the very best he could, making sure the ship was going to get where it needed to go. But the ship captain a lot of times is like a 1/8 owner, and he doesn't have he can't talk to in that case. It's like I need this fixed. I need this fixed right away. I need a fairly large sum of money to fix the ship to continue on my journey, and so he undergoes this contract, which their example here was 20%. So you borrow 10,000 whatever the currency is, and you're going to pay 2,000 in basically what am I looking for? The percentage that you're going to have to pay to continue on. And the bottomry contract had kind of like the I don't owe you if the ship goes down, right? It's like your 20%. You might lose that if we don't actually continue on your way. So whoever is doing the work is going to make sure that the ship can continue on its way. I'm sure that whoever's part of that contract is like, no,
yeah,
I'm not going to lose my money here. So make sure that it's going to continue.
Yeah, because it says you're like, if it never takes if the voyage. If intending to go on a voyage and then they enter into the bond, but the ship doesn't go on the voyage,
right,
and it's laying safe in the port of London, is their example, and then they should lose the premium and accept of his principal with usual interest. So, and you're like, they're not interested in that. So that ship is going on its trip.
Right. So they've got all these, and apparently this same concept of using the ship as collateral and the issue goes back into Roman law and even before that so different places. Super interesting about that. They have this whole chapter on averages, which is sort of like who's going to bear the cost if some of the stuff gets damaged on your ship. So let's, you've got some things are easier to damage than others. So you're shipping a big bunch of glassware and fabric, and the glassware all gets broken, but the fabric is fine. The people who are part of the cargo that's who maybe own the fabric part are still going to take some of the hit for the damage done to some of the other goods on board. So, the bad things that happen kind of get averaged out over all the people who are part of this. So, maybe some of the the insurers are going to pay or the owners are going to owe part of that. Hopefully insurance would cover the whole thing, and there are also a bunch of things about people insuring things and then breaking them on purpose, right? So let's say I'm gonna insure my really easy to break glassware, and I'm gonna insure it for
made it.
Right, it never made it, and it was rotten anyway, right? It's like, well, that was cheap junk anyway. But I insured it for a lot, and I made sure it all got broken. So, whoops, and you get paid. There's a whole bunch about things like that going on, where they're making sure that people are trying to take advantage of the system. Whew. Did we have any questions that were?
We do have. There was a super chat from Mandatory Carry at the beginning of the stream. He says, "At work, we'll catch rerun. Thank you."
Thank
4
you.
hearts. And there was a member chat from the German Frontier, and it is, "Thank you for all your work and research."
Yeah.
And I have a question.
Yeah.
Lots of people are saying that the stream is being jerky with the visuals and not the audio, and I am getting
Warning.
notifications that the bitrate is too low, but I don't know.
How to fix that?
I mean, I went into settings and
There is a bitrate setting, and you can lower it and hit apply.
you want me to lower the bitrate?
Right. Right. So change it to something like 3,000. What's it set at?
6,000.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll see that. We'll see if that works.
Oh, technology. See, they had to deal with, there's probably a contract. What happens when
Our
your
boat
bitrate
isn't sinking, so.
Huge chapter on privateers and the rules that apply on privateers. Can you remember part of that?
No, I didn't go into that one in a lot of depth, so I didn't see a lot about that one. Let's see. I think that one was farther to the back.
So one of the things that's going on with privateers is that we think of them as basically a pirate with a piece of paper that the king said, yeah, you can be a pirate, basically, right? And the rules around privateering were much, much more specific. To the extent that, so say you're Great Britain and you want to be a privateer, and you're in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars, where you're at war with France and you're at war with Spain and the United States at different times. If you were a privateer, you had to have the privateering documentation for each one. So you had to have permission to prey upon French ships. You had to have a different set to prey upon Spanish shipping or United States shipping. It wasn't a free-for-all. This is a get-out-of-jail-free card. And the rules are very, very specific about what happens when you take a ship. You have to make sure that all the different cargoes are, some of them might apply or some of them might not apply. Some things are exempt or not exempt. And if you do bad things to the people then the rules you are not protected by any of those rules. So there's a lot of complication about making sure that if you're a privateer, or in this case, you're a captain who has to deal with privateers. It's like, that's not how it necessarily works. So they have to understand the privateer's rules for both sides, so that if they happen to be a privateer or they have to deal with privateers. And the Great Britain privateers had, at least at this time in 1788, a 3,000 pound bond. So they had to make sure that the government wasn't just going to give anybody a letter of marque. It's like you had to be very, very serious. They didn't want basically pirates coming into this. It's like, no, they got to be very serious businessmen with a lot of money on the side that we will hold in case they're bad. And we've got, we can pay somebody back if they, fall outside of the rules. And there were things going on, like even in the insurance policy, and they talk about it here in the privateering chapter, about ransom. So there were situations where you would get captured, and you basically, you would say, let me go, I'll give you 100 pounds, or whatever. And the privateer had that choice of saying, okay, we'll do that. We'll take one person as a sort of collateral on the ransom, and I'll let you keep going, and you'll just pay me money. And that way, it was just easy to deal with making sure they weren't recaptured, making sure that the ship gets to its location, that things don't get stolen, that they didn't break any rules, and that the court gives the money back, or all these things. So it's like, but at some point, right in here in this time period, the ransom rules, at least in Great Britain, are kind of flipped over, and it becomes illegal. You can't do the ransom thing. I don't know how that applied if, say, you're a ship captain and, you get taken by a French person, and whether or not the rule was something like you can't ransom yourself, or whether it only applied to the people who are being the privateers, right? It's like you can't ask for a ransom. So, again, the complications, I'm sure the book would tell us.
I couldn't find my privateers chapter, alas. So somebody had a note earlier, they had a question, and they were wondering about whether there were rules for if the crew did not agree with the captain. And I don't know that I ran across that specifically in here.
I think it's in the duties.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, check the duties.
Okay.
So in the last chapter.
Last 2 pages.
Right.
Yeah, they do. They have a long list of, you're like, okay, what are we agreeing to?
Yes.
And
one of the things you have to do when you're doing the agreement, when you sign the sailors on board, they have to have a contract right then, so they know what the rules are. It's against the rules to just sign somebody up, say yeah you can be a sailor, and then halfway through it's like the rules are this. All of a sudden you find out there are new rules. Like you're playing Calvin ball or something.
Right, and like one of the first one is also you have to agree on the wages, right? You're like you can't change their wages part way. I'm sure they wouldn't mind if you paid them more, but
right.
And I thought this kind of, and a lot of the book really put in, reminded you again and again, it's a long voyage. A lot of these were very, very long. This is going to take up a big,
6 months.
A very big chunk of your life, and
right.
that they took it quite seriously,
Oh, yeah.
and it was very necessary to have everything ironed out really before you left, because there wasn't a lot you could do once you were out and about. You couldn't call back, and you couldn't call them on your cell phone and ask them, what you should do in this sticky situation. Yeah, you're not supposed to leave the ship. You don't absent yourself from the ship after signing, right? Yep. And I don't... Yes, and then on arrival in Great Britain, the master shall pay the wages if demanded, and you're like, and then it gives a time frame, and then it has, you're like, what are the punishments if someone refuses to defend the ship?
Yeah.
And that not laying violent hands on your commander. I don't know.
Well, and what is...
the obedience which mariners ought necessarily pay to their commanders, both for the safety of themselves and their employers, requires that we should say something on the subject. And so...
They must be subordinate, basically.
The subordination has been provided for in His Majesty's service, in which by order of the council, officers and mariners are liable to be tried by a court-martial for great offences, for drunkenness, They are to be put in irons till they are sober. For faults of an inferior nature not specified, the commander may inflict no more than 12 lashes. This is all about, though, for the crew. I
Right.
don't see anything about the captain. So I'm sure that you wanted to know the reputation of the captain before you signed on for to go, because it would make a huge difference in your treatment on board the ship.
For some examples of that, definitely if you're interested in that kind of life, 2 years before the mast by Dana. He is writing he was somebody who was in college. His eyesight was going bad. They thought, you know what, your eyesight's going bad. You should be a sailor. So he goes to sea as a sailor, and so he's very rarely do sailors write coherently or write at all their stories. But Dana here is both somebody who was going to college and served as a regular seaman, and he describes what it's like to live on board a ship, to deal with the captains and the abuses or not abuses that are happening there. And he ends up in later life as a lawyer, and he spends a lot of his time defending and working with regular sailors, right? Because he had been one, and he knew the abuses that could happen in those kinds of situations. So very interesting. There were 3 capital offenses if you're a sailor: refusing to fight, attacking the captain to prevent him fighting, destroying the ship. So you can't do any of those things, and those were capital offenses. Shall suffer or can suffer. They didn't necessarily have to, but those were it's like you can't do very, very particular things. And even if you just kind of refused, let's say you're at a storm at sea and you refuse your duty, then there are certain legal repercussions. So it's like, oh yeah, we're going to put him in irons, we're going to give him lashes, we're going to, because their lack of working in that particular situation is endangering everyone else's lives. Every week I try to get to about this time brand new and renewing YouTube members and Patreon. So I don't have a whole bunch of new or renewing YouTube members. Obviously somebody gifted something, so thank you very much for that. James Cheese and Chris Kennedy on that list. I also, though, wanted to pick out some of these super long time, almost 6-year members on the channel. These are all over 5 years. Been here from the very, very beginning, like day one when we said, hey, you could be a member. They were there. Eyes in the Sky, Tim McIlvain, Jatzet, Robert Green, Aaron, Johnny Mayo, Max Arcool, D. Renee 65, John Kennington, and then brand new Patreon supporter Michael Johnson. And I did want to mention this specifically. I have a major project that I am working on as we speak, and I'm going to need some help with that project. And I'm specifically going to reach out to the Patreon folks to help me with that. So if you're a Patreon supporter, make sure to watch your email on that. I am going to try to get that out tomorrow. I'm going to write up, rain's melting. I'm going to try to write that up and get that out to Patreon people tomorrow. So make sure to watch for that. What else do we have?
Somebody was asking earlier about Horatio Hornblower versus Aubrey Maturin. And you're like, oh, you got to make a decision between the two. You're like, just watch both of them. Or read both of them, watch both of them. I just think it's great that there's both the books that are very good for both of them. And then, so it would be the Horatio Hornblower series by C.S. Forrester.
Yep.
And then the Aubrey and Matron series by Patrick O'Brien.
O'Brien,
And then there's the adaptation. So Horatio Hornblower has the TV series, and then there's the
Movie.
Master and Commander.
Yeah.
And they're both so good, and I wouldn't want to choose between them.
Well, I would choose.
Yes, Dad, obviously, his favorite is the Aubrey and Matron. But while I was reading the book, they kept coming up.
Oh, yeah.
Situations from both series. Just this particular, there's a section about repair,
Yep.
and it was making me think of the one that being one of the central points in one of the episodes in the Hornblower, or just all sorts of different things that were coming up from the
Yeah,
Aubrey
so
Matron.
I mean, this stuff is constantly being referred to in the Aubrey and Matron series. So, when he's got to deal with refitting, he's got to deal with the business transactions going on. The captain here, even in a Man of War, especially in smaller Man of War, the captain is still doing all these same kinds of bookkeeping things. And in one of the, in the Aubrey and Matron series, about halfway through or so in the books, Jack is he's thrown out of the Navy because of someone made it look like he did something on the stock market. Why that worked out in the Navy, don't ask. But he gets thrown out of the Navy, and so he then for a couple of books he is privateer. So we have a whole new set of rules, and the author, of course, gives us a whole new set of criteria, right? So we get a whole new environment for them to work in, and so a lot of this stuff applies, and we find out, and that's one of the I think Patrick O'Brien spent a ton of time in documents like this, as well as the great part about Patrick O'Brien is he spent a lot of time reading things like Jane Austen, right?
Yeah.
So he's really spending the time in these documents, and then he brings the storytelling of Jane Austen into that whole series. So there's not just sailors, but how do you deal with what's going on with wives and what it was like then, and the relationship issues that are going on. So I think that the Aubrey and Matron series is the grown-up version of because I really feel like the Hornblower ones were kind of shooting at that 14-year-old kind of
it
a
does
thing.
feel like they're meant for teens and 20s, like that is the
Adventure,
perfect age for them. And then the Aubrey and Matron does feel like it's that next, when you're 30s, 40s, that's the
Right.
perfect time for it. And 'cause sometimes you just get that feeling from books, like the perfect age to read them at. You can read them a lot of times at any age, but there's a perfect ideal one.
Right. But if you're a fan of something like Jane Austen, I think you would enjoy, especially he really comes into that in the second book.
Yeah.
Where they spend a lot of time on shore and kind of relationship issues as well as naval things going on. So, if a captain did have to execute a crewman, would it be done walk the plank?
It didn't. I don't remember seeing any instructions about it.
That would come up under, the captain wouldn't want to be in a situation where if he did it wrong, he's going to get killed.
Yeah.
Right? So he doesn't want to be accused of murder. So even if you had a ship, a crew member who was being that bad, that they would just put them in irons and wait and keep them prisoner, because you wouldn't execute them. That's somebody else's authority, basically. So somebody else is going to deal with that.
We do have some super chats and
Go ahead.
whatnot.
Jump in.
Max Arkle sent 5 Townsend Gift memberships in.
Thank you.
And then how do you normally say this name, Lauren?
Which one?
Jaji?
Oh, Jaji.
Judge. Okay.
I don't actually know if that's the correct pronunciation. Sorry if it isn't.
Yes,
but-
well, if I'm saying it the way you say it, then it's your fault that I'm saying it
Perfect.
wrong. So, he says, if you are on the water and then you are in the water, something has gone catastrophically wrong.
It absolutely has.
And then James Cheese sends in a members chat, and he says, hope you and everyone have a great weekend.
Thank you.
And then Jordan Flack says, I get a big kick out of every time I read Hornblower and think, I only know this word because of Townsend. So thanks to your entire family and team for all you do.
Yeah, it's fun to read those things, and I mean, a lot of times the only reason why I know some of these things so quickly is because I've reread the Aubrey and Matron series over and over and over again. It's like, oh, of course this is happening, right? You know, so it's great too that we have access to references like this, right? So you know, I just
Yes.
go online. Well, you haven't put the link to this yet in the.
I always try to get the PDF in before
Right.
we start, but it hasn't happened yet. But I will try to do it later tonight. Yeah.
Right, and this is pretty readable.
Yes, it
and,
absolutely is.
You can definitely skip through. Can you bring up the one of the tables for me? The wages table.
Yes, I can. Hold on. Let me.
So as a reference book, this is this is. I can imagine how well thumbed the copies would be, right? So
Absolutely.
the captain's like, "Where's that book again?" Right? He probably has it in his back pocket. So the book has a bunch of tables like this. So this is a table that has to do with deducting wages of your sailors, deducting from the wages the money that goes to the Greenwich Hospital. So the sailors had to pay like Social Security, basically. And this is the okay, if he gets paid this per month, then, and you work so many days, then this would be the deduction. Can you find the other table that's kind of like this too? So this is a table for calculating wages. It says in the Royal Navy, it doesn't really matter. This is for calculating wages. Doesn't even matter whether it's for sailors. It is called a ready reckoner table. Now today, everybody's got a calculator, or you know, you're working with a cash register, your cell phone has a calculator. We have pocket calculators that basically sell for nothing. But in the time period, say before, how about this for the time period? Say before 1950, this is the way most people would do calculations. You would have a ready reckoner table like this, and you would say, so along the side, like day one, shillings and D is pennies, right? So let's say you're getting paid 1 shilling and 7 pence a day. And then you say, okay, for how many days? If it's 6 days, that turns out to be 9 shillings, 7 pence. Or if it's 3 weeks, that's £1.13. So you could just do, you don't have to get out your paper and do any calculation. You just have a table like this. You would work down one side, find the number you're looking, go across to the columns until you find the other number that you're looking for, and ta-da, there you go. So if the sailor gets paid 1 shilling, 9 pence a day, then at the end of 6 months, you owe him 15 pounds. Done. And your calculation's done instantly. You don't have to worry about it. This is the most popular way that merchants, sellers of anything, they're just going to have a ready reckoner table, little book that's full of these little tables. Very popular in the 18th century, extremely popular in the 19th century. Who needs a calculator? Just flip to the right page. Boop, boop, done. Yeah, you can go ahead. Here's a table of the cordage, showing how many fathoms or feet and inches of a rope of any size, not more than 14 inches, how many fathoms or inches or feet make a hundredweight. So I know that seems weird, but it's like, okay, no what? Right. So I'm going to buy a hundredweight of 1 inch rope. How many feet am I going to get? And a lot of things are sold that way. Even today, there are some things like thread that are sold by, I mean, you'll say like, I want some number 60 thread. Well, number 60 thread is you get 60 yards in 1 pound or something like that. But in this case, it had to do with rope. And the rope and cordage on a ship is of like a million varieties, all the way up to something that is 20 inches in diameter, a huge piece of rope that you might use for an anchor cable that's or connecting two ships. You're pulling one ship with another ship, and you need this massive cable. And so they're making all the way down to little tiny, cordage. And here we have plates of the handmade rope making of the time period. And basically, a giant rope that's 20 inches in circumference, well, it's just made up of a whole bunch of little ropes, right? So
just keep on going.
You start making this basically a thread, and that turns into a cord, and that turns into a rope, and that turns into and you just keep adding and adding until you get this giant rope. And they had to make these whole, because it's kind of done all at once, they would make rope walks. They'd have a big, long building so that they could stretch this piece of rope out over a long period. Here they show these tiny little, a tiny little room, but the reality is
this one
even
kind
that,
of shows
right,
it a
you
little
can
bit
see it's a big, long rope. But of course, that might be in a real rope factory 300 feet long or something like that, because you have to stretch this rope out. They also show in Diderot's how sometimes they might have a building that has like stairs in a spiral. They would go up and up and up this spiral so they could make a big long rope and not have to have a
Space efficient.
And it's one of those spots that's very, very flammable. You have to be really careful in the area of the rope walk. All this rope is flaking all the time, and it makes basically little dust clouds of rope flaking rope all the time. And there was a person who was a terrorist in the 18th century who tried to burn up shipyards. It was just one guy. He was just like nuts. And he burned up a rope walk one time. It was really weird. Anyway.
That's so sad.
Were you going to jump into something?
Somebody was asking a little bit earlier about provisions,
Yep.
and they have a handy chart, right,
Yep.
to help illustrate. So Sunday, pork, 1 pound, or beef, 1.5 pounds, peas, half a pint. And then Monday, oatmeal, 1 pint, butter, 2 ounces, cheese, 4 ounces. And then they have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, beef, 2 pounds. So then they have their next handy little note for you. You're like, multiply the number of men by the number of days to be victualled for, and it gives the bread in pounds and beef and beer in gallons. Divide the gallons of beer by 60, and it will give you hogsheads. Divide the hogsheads by 4, and it will give you tons. So it's giving him, you're like, okay, if you need to buy it, just this is how you do your calculations.
How many days is it going to be done?
Right, and you're like, I just thought that was so interesting, because you can imagine, you're like, if this is your first voyage and you're trying to figure out what in the world you should be doing, again, you take out your book, your very well-worn book, you flip to the right spot. And I was very surprised when I was reading this, how very succinct and efficient they are. A lot of times in 18th century books, they will go on for quite some time on a topic.
But this is condensed.
It is. They are trying to pack in as much useful information as possible. It is meant to be used on.
Right. Right.
As a working book.
And notice these provisions. Sunday, you get pork or beef. Monday, it's just oatmeal and cheese. It's a banyan day.
And butter.
Well, and butter, but there's no meat.
No.
Tuesday, you get meat. On Wednesday, no meat, but you get peas. On Thursday, there's meat. On Friday, no meat. And then, so it's like every other day you get meat, and then you have these non-meat days, which they called Banyan days, which had to do with places they thought were vegetarian, and so they kind of named it after that. Thought it was kind of interesting.
Ivy, can you jog the chat? It's
Stuck over here.
So I was going to read this,
Yeah.
the intro. So this is miscellaneous articles, and they have of quarantine, of the quantity of powder allowed on board in the River Thames, so you don't want too much in your main city, of the best method for preventing anchors from coming home, of stopping a leak or of fathering vessels. That's what made me think of Horatio Hornblower.
Right.
Of preparing for action, and then daily provision for the Royal Navy, and then rules for ascertaining the tonnage and burthen of ships, and then to find how much powder is sufficient for any piece of ordnance. And then and they also talk about other stuff, how much shot you would need. So they want to make sure that you can figure out exactly what you're going to need, depending on what kind of ship, how many men you have, that kind of thing.
Right. And they talk about the fathering of ships, right? So there's a big section of that in one of the Aubrey and Matron series. In fact, he has to father a couple of different ships. And what you do, it's like you've got this, maybe you've run onto a big rock or a iceberg or something, or your ship is just coming apart. In one of the ships, in one of the books, he had to overstress the ship, and it basically is starting to fall apart. And they have to take a rope and wrap it around the ship, like a big coil to keep it from falling apart. But a fathering is where you take a sail and you sew onto the sail oakum and wool, and then mix dung in with that if you happen to have any dung. Which here he says, it's like, hopefully you've got some horse dung. That's the best kind. It's like, I don't know. Anyway, you take that under the ship, you stretch it under the ship, and you hope that it kind of sucks into the hole and plugs it up, so that you can keep going with this Band-Aid stuck on the bottom of your ship. And in one of them, they run into an iceberg, and it rips a big hole in the ship, and they spend a lot of time trying to plug the hole in the ship so they don't sink.
That would be a bad thing.
Yeah.
So I was going to do this other section. So again, he's doing some shorthand for us. So he says, of useful things.
Just random stuff.
Thank you. So he's like, okay, a ream of paper is 20 quires of paper. A quire of paper is 24 sheets of paper. He talks about a bale of paper is 10 reams of paper. He talks about parchment, hides, gloves, timber, squared timber, 1-inch plank. And then he's 2-inch plank. He keeps going on. Of coals, how much a hogshead of wine is 63 gallons of wine, beer, ale, cheese, pence in a pound, and like corn, and it's so helpful. This reminded me of the New York Public Library desk reference. You're like, if you don't have the internet to look things up, you want this sort of information. You're like, and they talked about it. I forget the name of the books where you would write your own personal book that had these sort of notes to yourself, the things you always forget, right? How to spell that one word that you can never remember how to spell it. And that you just make these little notes with you. But of course, for this one, he's just giving you everything he could possibly think of that might help you.
Right. And somewhere in the middle, basically, they print out verbatim all the navigation rules that are law. Basically, it's like, here are all the laws. We're not even going to summarize them. We're just going to print them out for you. And there's some fascinating stuff in there, even to the extent where Great Britain at the time, especially having to deal with smuggling, they made particular kinds of boats illegal. It's like, no, you can't have a boat that is skinnier than this for its length. which is like, we don't, it's like, what are you talking about? I can't have a boat that's 40 feet long but only 6 feet wide? No, you can't do that. You can't have a boat that has a bowsprit that's too long, or et cetera, because those were the kind of boats that people used for smuggling, and they were really, really fast. So, you know, it's just like naval ships couldn't keep up with them, so they just made them illegal. It's like, so later on, for smuggling ships, they would actually use some of those kinds of designs. The cutter design was specifically used by a lot of smugglers, and then the people that are the excise people would run those same kinds of boats. And they even, in Aubrey Maturin's series, they talked about the a Death or Money boat, which was a very, very long, skinny boat that was rowed by hand, and they were just for, they could carry not very much at all. They were just for smuggling gold from France to Great Britain. And you got paid a lot of money, but you might die doing it, right? Because it was a real low, little boat, and but really, really fascinating laws and the rules behind it. It's like, why would they have a law like this? Well, we'll find out if we, you know, read a little deeper.
Yeah, and it's here in the Navigation and Trade Acts, and
Yep.
there's a lot of rules about, you're like, only certain people are allowed to be bringing in, only certain people are allowed to do the transports from some area to another.
Yeah.
And I'm sure because to help keep down smuggling.
Well, and
Not
that
that
was-
it didn't
yeah,
happen, but
right,
just
right.
to have rules around it.
So those are rules, I mean, this is written after the Revolution, but before the Revolution, you know, you could not just necessarily bring goods from France to the colonies. Doesn't work like that. All the things had to go through Great Britain, and you know, you if it comes from France, then you're smuggling.
Yeah.
And that's what these navigation acts were, to keep those kinds of things from happening. They want to make sure they get their cut, basically. Whew. Did we cover most of it? I know that there's parts that we missed, but yeah, you can't torture people, salvage on a sliding scale. They had, you know, things with ransom. When he talks about the keeping track of the accounting, you're even keeping tracks of things like, you know, oh, I bought so many cabbages, you know, or
Yes.
Food that was cooked on shore for people, or bribes. It's like, oh, if you had to bribe people,
make sure to write it
put
down.
that down. He even has the talk about the captain making sure that when you are making some of these little notes about things that are brought on board, make sure that you say particular things like, I couldn't tell whether these were good all the way to the middle, right? So it was like, a bunch of the fabric was brought on board, but I didn't make sure that it was all good.
Yeah.
Right? So that if something, you know, so it's basically covering your butt
Right,
in
and
case something happens.
A lot of times when you're reading things like a journal, and you'll notice that they always describe the weather. They're like, today was fair, today was stormy, today was rainy. It's like they
Right.
start out with a certain thing, and he's coaching you. You're like, now when you're doing it, you're like, give an idea of what the quality of the goods was like. And if
Right.
you don't know, say you don't know. Now's a
Well,
great time to note it.
Even that, I mean, you just mentioned that because of the quality of the goods.
Yeah.
But keeping track of the weather
Yes.
and all that is really, really important in case bad things happen. And the owners want to come back on you to say you didn't do your duty. And it's like, no, here's the logbook.
Yeah.
You know, here's what the wind was like. Here's what happened here. That's why, you know, the ship wrecked or whatever. It wasn't my fault. So, the ship captain has to keep track of a ton of stuff, because it's not only people's lives that are at stake, but his reputation and his financial life has to do with making sure all the bases are covered and he can explain everything that might happen. Mm-hmm. Well, this is, when we've got books like this, you can spend, forever going down the rabbit hole on this because, you'll dig into a chapter and it's so dense too because he's compacted all this information in there that there's a bunch of stories there. We still have access to literally hundreds of ships' logs.
Yeah.
And sometimes full accountings like these things are. And they can be, you can read them and it's just like, I don't understand.
They're
right?
almost in code. And
Right,
it
they
makes
are in
sense when
code.
you realize how much they had to record. You're like, well, no
Right.
wonder they kept it efficient.
But this is like a key to understanding what they're doing with those. And there are other keys like this. So this is the ShipMaster's assistant that really is to do with the business of it. But there are other books that have to do with keeping track of all the navigation and keeping track of, etc. You can imagine it was. Can you imagine writing all that stuff down and you're, dipping your pen all the time? I don't know how they did it.
The ship is, swaying
Yeah, the ship
from
is
side to
sinking.
side.
You're like, I'm just writing. Hold on, I gotta write. This is my journal.
I did you have something for us?
Yes, I have one last super chat from Rose McGuinn. She says, "Great topic today. Thanks, Townsends."
Glad you're
Well,
enjoying it.
you can thank Lauren for finding this one.
I was so excited. I found it while I was looking for something else, and I'm like, Dad's gonna love this one. It's about ships.
Yeah.
What could be better?
Massive topic. I could have spent the whole time talking about privateering, and we might break
Yeah.
some of these down into the deeper sections, but we kind of wanted to give that full view of the complexity of doing business in this time period. The captain had a hard job of balancing all these things, as well as making sure the ship gets to the other shore and making sure everyone's being disciplined, properly on the way there, and bad things aren't happening. And then he has to transact business and contracts and all this good stuff. So an amazing thing going on here. I'm glad that I don't have to be. Well, I am kind of a ship captain.
At least we're on land. Nothing sinks.
That's true.
Most
That's
of the
true.
time.
That's good. Thank you. I want to thank Lauren and Ivy for helping me out today. Thank you for your incredible support for what we do on the channel. We sell fun merch, and you can be a member, you can be on Patreon, or any number of ways that you can help us do what we do. And we're just here trying to figure out, if we can't figure out what life was like in the 18th century, how can we figure out life today, right? Everybody's like, I just want to live in simpler times. Well, I'm not sure if that was any simpler. But they got through. We can't imagine the difficulties that they had to deal with day in, day out, right? And they were just like, well, it's what life is, right? Mm-hmm. And we can look at those lives and we can say, no, they didn't live in simpler times. They just lived in different times. And yes, we will figure out what's going to happen next. I don't know how we're going to figure out what happens next, but they did, so we can do it too. I hope you have a tremendous weekend. Thanks for watching.